A woman returns from Central Africa and notices strange red lesions on her shoulder. When she mentions them to her doctor, he immediately calls the police. What happens next is completely unbelievable. Janie Cunningham was perplexed. Her body still ached from her adventures in Central Africa. For weeks in the rainforest, tracking mountain gorillas, had left her more than just a little exhausted, but that morning, she felt more than just tired. She had a slight fever and muscle pain unlike anything she had ever experienced. She dragged herself out of bed and shuffled into the bathroom. She laughed at her reflection in the mirror. A peculiar tan framed her face, leaving the area around her ears and the sides of her neck stark white. She had worn a hat the entire time, and this was the result, but there was something else bothering her. She had a sensitive spot on her right shoulder that had started troubling her during the night. The sensation was odd. A mix of intense itching and a burning feeling. It was too tender to scratch. Janie pulled down the side of her t-shirt to take a look. A large red patch had appeared on her shoulder, with tiny red dots forming within it. It was as if her skin had been pierced by hundreds of needles, each leaving a tiny drop of blood at its center. Her first thought was that something in the jungle might have bitten her. The rainforest was teeming with creatures most Westerners had never heard of. Centipedes were everywhere, not to mention jungle spiders. Who knew what a bite from one of them could do? Everyone who knew Janie considered her a wild child, obsessed with diving. She was always traveling to exotic locations to explore underwater landscapes or dive into shipwrecks. When she wasn't in the water, she was climbing mountains or embarking on impossible treks through the wilderness. Mountain gorillas in Central Africa had always fascinated her, so when the chance arose to visit the Democratic Republic of Congo to see these majestic creatures in their natural habitat, she seized the opportunity without hesitation. Janie initially checked into a lodge on the shores of Lake Kivu. The lodge was a popular spot for UN workers and expatriates seeking a piece of tranquility in the chaotic city. But Janie wasn't there for peace, she was there for adventure. The morning after her arrival, she woke up at 6 a.m., had a quick breakfast, and was picked up by a national park employee. Excitedly heading to the starting point of her trek, Janie learned that gorilla conservation in the Democratic Republic of Congo was taken very seriously, and for good reason. It was a dangerous undertaking. On average, a ranger in the national park lost their life every month. It was simply the harsh reality of having one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. The minibus came to a stop, and Janie, along with 2 rangers, set out on foot. Within 2 hours, they had climbed to an altitude of 1550 meters. The heat and humidity made the hike grueling. They traversed gentle hills, their eyes scanning eagerly for any sign of black amidst the green. They were truly in untouched territory. There were no trails to follow, no well-trodden paths made by tourists. Instead, one of their guides used a massive machete to hack through vines and bushes, creating a trail for them to follow. Eventually, they stumbled upon a family of primates, 6 mountain gorillas lounging just a few meters away on the forest floor, 2 silverbacks, a baby, and 3 juveniles. Suddenly, one of them let out a loud sneeze, and the baby somersaulted playfully toward the group. These were untamed animals, going about their usual activities as if Janie and the rangers weren't even there. They displayed boundless playfulness. Adults and juveniles rolled around, hugged one another, and gently pushed each other. The experience was mesmerizing. On the descent, Janie couldn't help but feel she had been transformed, that she could never be the same person after coming into contact with such incredible creatures. During her stay in the Democratic Republic of Congo, she trekked to see the gorillas 4 more times, and each time, she returned filled with a profound sense of awe. Now, standing in front of the mirror at home, her thoughts wandered back to the jungle, the persistent insects and the 2 occasions she had to shake scorpions out of her jeans. It was more than likely that something had bitten or stung her while chasing after the gorillas. She touched the red bump on her shoulder with her fingertips. Again, the sensation was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. Her skin was hypersensitive to touch, yet the red patch itched like crazy. Better safe than sorry, she thought. She found her phone on the nightstand and called her doctor. He would know what to do. He was well aware of her penchant for traveling to remote corners of the globe and always ensured she had the proper vaccinations and took the necessary precautions before each trip. However, This was the first time she had come back with something. An hour later, she stepped through the door to his office. The reception area was empty, and there was no one else waiting. It took less than 5 minutes before she was called in. Janie sat across from Dr. Collins at his desk and began recounting her experiences. Dr. Collins had been her physician for nearly a decade, and as always, he listened intently to every word. When she mentioned the strange spots on her shoulder, he asked her to show them to him. Janie pulled down one sleeve of her shirt to expose her shoulder. Dr. Collins walked around the desk to get a closer look, and then he fell silent. Janie noticed the deep furrows forming on his forehead. Something was definitely wrong, and what made it worse was that Dr. Collins wasn't telling her what it was. "What's going on?" she asked nervously. Dr. Collins rubbed his chin thoughtfully and said, "I'm not sure, Janie. I'll need to run some tests to find out. Just wait here for a moment." Lost in thought, he stepped out of the room, through the closed door. She could hear him instructing the receptionist to cancel all his appointments for the day. Then, she caught snippets of a phone call he made. "The Center for Disease Control," she thought. What on earth is happening? When Dr. Collins returned, he was wearing a face mask and didn't venture further into the room than the doorway. "I'm concerned that you may have brought something dangerous back from Central Africa, Janie," he said. "I'm not equipped to conduct the necessary tests or implement the appropriate protocols if it's what I suspect." She wished he would just say it outright. The way he was behaving, anyone would think she had contracted leprosy or something equally dreadful and contagious. Panic began to rise within her, quickly giving way to irritation. She wanted to know what he was thinking, and she wanted to know immediately. Dr. Collins hesitated before asking, "Did you come into contact with any sick individuals during your time in the Congo?" Janie thought back and remembered that there had been a flu outbreak among the lodge staff where she stayed. However, she had barely interacted with them and doubted she had ever shared a room with any of them. But Dr. Collins' next question made her head spin. "Were any of them kitchen staff?" he asked. She didn't respond, but her eyes welled up with tears. Dr. Collins seemed to take pity on her and finally told her what he suspected. "You're exhibiting symptoms of a viral hemorrhagic fever," he said, "something like Ebola, Marburg, or Lassa fever." Janie felt as though her entire world was collapsing. In a panic, she asked him why he would suspect something so severe. "The fever, the muscle pain, and the skin changes on your shoulder," he explained, "and, of course, the fact that you've just returned from a region where these diseases are present." "Diseases are rampant," he explained, adding that he had already informed the CDC. "They have the capability to conduct the necessary tests in a proper environment. These diseases are highly contagious," he said. "It's about taking the best possible care of you and preventing the disease from spreading. If you have it, what if it was just a mosquito or a spider?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Collins slowly attempted a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I'm wrong, and you'll be fine," he replied. The rest of the day flew by. CDC staff arrived, all dressed in protective suits, accompanied by police. They transported her to a quarantine facility and began testing. The entire experience felt surreal to her. She received only brief, curt answers to her questions, which caused her anxiety to spiral. Dr. Collins had promised to contact her family, but she had given strict instructions that they were not to travel from Florida to New York until there was more certainty. For the tests, CDC doctors in full protective gear drew an entire vial of blood. For 2 days, Janie sat alone in her room, or cell, as she preferred to call it, trapped in her own thoughts. "At least I've had a great life," she told herself, then added, "but I'm not done living it yet." She tried not to dwell on worst-case scenarios, but it was difficult to maintain a positive outlook. After lunch, there was a knock at the door. It was Dr. Collins, and he had a broad smile on his face. "Not Ebola," he said, "or any other hemorrhagic fever, but it is something that needs attention." Janie felt a turbulent mix of anger and relief. She shook her head and asked, "What is it then?" "Necrotizing fasciitis," he replied matter-of-factly. "It mimics many of the symptoms of hemorrhagic fever, even down to the skin changes." Janie suddenly realized how ridiculous the past 48 hours had been. She couldn't suppress her laughter. "So, you and the CDC wasted my time?" she asked, chuckling. You locked me up like an ordinary criminal with a bad case of leprosy. And for what? An insect bite. Is that the cause of this? She rubbed the spot on her shoulder to make her point, shaking her head at the absurdity of it all. Dr. Collins shook his head. Not quite, he said. Necrotizing fasciitis is bacterial in nature. It usually enters your body through a scrape or injury to the skin, but it's treatable with the right antibiotics. You'll be back on your feet in no time. Janie felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. Finally, she could breathe again. Just then, her phone pinged with a notification for another exotic trip. She gladly accepted the invitation. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she didn't want to waste another second of it. What a creepy story. After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time. This family photograph shows a loving couple with their 2 children, all smiling, seemingly the perfect picture of happiness, but who would have ever imagined that such a seemingly simple family photo would, in the end, lead to the dissolution of their marriage? One small detail, hidden within the image, became the catalyst that ultimately tore their family apart. Can you guess what I'm referring to? It's hard to believe that something so small could carry such significant weight. Yet that single detail was enough to unravel everything. This photograph was supposed to be nothing more than a cherished memento, an image that would invoke fond memories, bringing a smile to anyone who glanced at it. It was meant to represent joy, love, and togetherness. But fate had other plans, and things didn't unfold as expected. Then came the moment when Susan saw the photo for the very first time. As she gazed at the image, something about it caught her attention in a way she hadn't anticipated. A wave of realization washed over her, and instinctively, her fingers reached for her husband's hand. What she saw in that photo was enough to send shockwaves through her, and it left her feeling a mix of confusion and disbelief. Susan and John had been together since their college days. From the very start, their friends had always said that they were made for each other, that their bond was so strong that it was destined to last forever. So, when Susan and John eventually got married after graduation, it came as no surprise to anyone. Everything seemed picture perfect. They both had thriving careers, they lived in a beautiful home, and they had 2 adorable children. To Susan, her life appeared to be a dream come true, one that many could only wish for. She had no reason to believe that there was anything amiss. No hint that John might not be as completely satisfied with their life together as she was. For Susan, everything seemed wonderful, like something out of a fairy tale. And so, when she looked at their family and saw all the happiness and love that surrounded them, she felt the urge to preserve it all in a series of photographs. She imagined that years down the road, she would look back at these pictures and smile, remembering the warmth and joy they had shared together. However, years later, if given the chance, Susan would have given anything to go back in time, to undo the events that followed and change the course of her life. She never could have predicted that this innocent family photo would play such a pivotal role in the unraveling of everything she held dear. Determined to capture the perfect memory, Susan decided to arrange a family photo shoot. She reached out to a photographer who was a close family friend. The photographer was quick to respond, assuring her that they could schedule the shoot the very next day. The weather that day was nothing short of perfect, bright, sunny, and crisp, with the vibrant colors of autumn leaves dancing in the gentle breeze. It was the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for creating beautiful, lasting memories. Yet, as the family prepared for the shoot, there was a subtle but unmistakable sense of unease in the air. John, in particular, seemed preoccupied. Susan noticed his strange behavior almost immediately. He was distant, distracted, and somewhat on edge, but she didn't give it much thought at the time. She knew that John wasn't particularly fond of being in front of the camera. He often felt uncomfortable in such settings, and she assumed that his unease was nothing more than his usual self-consciousness. Little did she know, this photo would be the beginning of a journey that would change everything. When the photographer arrived at their home, he immediately noticed that her husband, John, had turned unusually pale. It was a stark contrast to his usual demeanor. The photographer greeted everyone warmly, his voice full of enthusiasm and cheer. He was a family friend, someone who had visited Susan and John's house countless times before, and everyone in the household loved his presence. His visits were always something to look forward to, filled with light-hearted conversations and laughter. However, this time, John seemed different. His usual easygoing nature was nowhere to be found. He forced a smile for the camera, but it looked unnatural, strained, and insincere, as though he was trying too hard to appear at ease. Susan, however, was oblivious to her husband's discomfort. She was so caught up in the excitement of the photo shoot that she didn't pay much attention to his odd behavior. She assumed that John was simply nervous about being in front of the camera. As many people were, after all, everything in her life seemed perfect at that moment. She had a wonderful, loving family, a fulfilling career, and a beautiful home. Her life seemed complete. This photo shoot, she thought, would be the perfect way to preserve this moment of happiness forever. The photographer sent the completed family portraits to Susan's email just the following day. She was thrilled by how quickly he had finished the work and eagerly anticipated seeing the photos. As soon as Susan returned home that evening, she went straight to her laptop. Feeling a wave of excitement, she opened her inbox and began scrolling through the pictures one by one. With every image, her smile widened. The photographer had truly captured something special. The lighting was perfect, the colors vibrant, and the way he had captured her children's joyful expressions was simply heartwarming. Everything about the photos felt just right. And Susan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment as she relished in the memory of the perfect day they had spent together. Susan began selecting the best pictures to print and hang up in their home. She even considered choosing one for a holiday card to send to her relatives. But then, one photo caught Susan's attention. It was a picture of her and John together. She couldn't help but notice the anxiety that was clearly visible on John's face. It looked like he was posing with strangers, not with his own family. Susan thought back to that day, trying to figure out what had unsettled her husband so much. Something in the photo stood out to her, and she zoomed in on John's hand. When she looked closely at his ring, she was shocked. It wasn't his wedding ring, it was the wedding ring of his friend. Susan slammed her laptop shut, trying to process what she had just seen. She froze, unable to do anything but sit there, in complete shock. And then it all clicked. Susan tried to push away the troubling thoughts that overwhelmed her, but they wouldn't leave her mind. John had loved her. She knew that. She had always felt it. But why was he wearing someone else's wedding ring instead of his own? How long had he been wearing that ring? Susan glanced at her own wedding ring. The only question in her mind was, had everything been a lie? Had she been so blind that she hadn't seen the deception? Had John been hiding something from her? Susan realized she needed to talk to her husband about the ring. She asked her neighbor to watch the kids, not wanting them to witness the argument between their parents. When John came home from work, the house was quiet. Susan was waiting for him in the living room, and John immediately sensed that she knew something. He decided it was time to confess everything. He explained that the issue was with his sexual orientation. But he still loved his wife and children and wanted to keep his family intact. Susan was shocked, but deep down, she had suspected something. She had noticed signs before about John's orientation. She had always felt he might be in love with his childhood friend from middle school, but this confession didn't end there. John revealed that he had been having an affair, and his lover was none other than their family friend, the photographer, the very same man their family adored. Susan couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she remembered how uneasy John had been when the photographer arrived. She recalled the special looks exchanged between them when they first met, and it all came together like a terrible nightmare. Her life wasn't as perfect as she had believed. Susan had wanted to create family photos as a memory to never forget how happy she had been in that moment. But how wrong she had been, ironically. The photo shoot that was supposed to capture the best moments of her life ended up flipping it upside down. John was in love with someone else. John had cheated on her. John hadn't been the perfect husband. Susan couldn't speak as John continued to reveal the truth, telling her everything that had happened to the man she had once loved so deeply. What happened to the man who had given her 2 wonderful children? Had John always loved men? How could he have kept this secret for so long? How could he do this to his family? All these questions swirled in her mind as she tried to compose herself while listening to John's explanation. Susan watched John as he cried, telling her the truth. This man had made her believe that her life was perfect, but now everything was shattered. She placed her hand on John's knee and calmly said, "It's okay, darling, I forgive you." Despite everything, she still loved John and wanted him to be happy. Susan and John filed for divorce, but over time, their love transformed into a strong friendship. Years later, they managed to preserve the most valuable thing, mutual respect and love for their children. Despite John's infidelity and the lies about his sexuality, Susan held no grudge against her ex-husband. The most important thing was that they both found their happiness. Love can take many forms. The love between Susan and John had withstood all the trials. It was no longer the romantic love you read about in songs and poems, but a different kind of love, strong, unconditional, and tested by time. Susan and John had both found happiness. Not every couple could maintain such a warm relationship after a breakup, but in their case, they managed. They remained a family, loving their children more than anything in the world, but each had found their own soulmate who made them the happiest people on the planet. Indeed, love has no boundaries. After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.